the assassination of Julius Caesar. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, the most powerful man in the known world, bled out on the cold marble floor of Pompey's theater, stabbed 23 times by men he called friends, and with his dying breath he uttered not a curse, but a question that would echo through eternity. Image prompt. 1. The lifeless body of Julius Caesar sprawled on blood-stained marble steps beneath a towering statue of Pompey Magnus, Roman Republican era. Harsh morning light streaming through columned portico, casting long, dramatic shadows across the crime scene. Mood of absolute horror and historical finality. Wide establishing, shot showing the intimate violence contrasted against grand architectural scale, style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. You are standing in Rome on the morning of March 15th and something feels wrong. The air itself seems to hold its breath. Slaves whisper in doorways. Priests examine the entrails of sacrificed animals and turn pale. A soothsayer named Spurina has been following Caesar through the streets for days, crying out his warning about this date, but the dictator has laughed it off. In the pre-dawn darkness, Caesar's wife Calpurnia woke screaming from a nightmare in which she cradled her husband's bleeding corpse. She begged him not to go to the Senate. For a moment, he actually considered staying home. That single decision might have changed everything. Image prompt. Calpurnia clutching Caesar's arm in their opulent bedchamber, her face twisted in desperate pleading, pre-dawn darkness, flickering oil lamplight creating dancing shadows on frescoed walls, mood of prophetic dread and domestic intimacy, medium close-up shot focusing on her terrified expression and his conflicted face, style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen, but Decimus Brutus arrived at Caesar's home that morning with honeyed words and careful manipulation. He mocked the dictator gently, suggesting that Rome would laugh if Caesar stayed home because of a woman's dream. The Senate was waiting to offer him new honors, Decimus insisted, perhaps even the crown of king, though only for territories outside Italy. Caesar's ambition, that old familiar hunger, stirred within him. He dismissed Calpurnia's fears, kissed her forehead, and stepped out into the streets of Rome for the last time. The trap was set, and the greatest military mind of his generation walked straight into it. Image prompt. 3. Julius Caesar in his late 50s, wearing his distinctive red general's cloak and laurel crown, striding confidently through the narrow stone streets of Rome, surrounded by clients and petitioners, golden morning light filtering through hanging laundry and architectural shadows, mood of proud authority mixed with impending doom, tracking shot at ground level showing his powerful presence style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. What makes a man great enough to murder? This question had consumed Rome's aristocracy for months. Caesar had crossed the Rubicon 4 years earlier, plunging Rome into civil war. He had defeated Pompey the Great, the previous military champion of the Republic. He had pursued his enemies to Egypt, where he had become entangled with Cleopatra, and installed her as queen. He had campaigned in Africa and Spain, crushing the remaining opposition. He had celebrated 4 triumphs in a single year, parading the wealth of nations through Roman streets. He had been declared dictator for life, breaking the most sacred tradition of Republican Rome. The question that burned in the minds of 60 senators was simple and terrible. Had Caesar become a tyrant who had to die for Rome to live? Image prompt 4. a secret midnight meeting of the conspirators in a torch-lit basement chamber, faces half hidden in darkness, Marcus Brutus at the center, looking tormented, dancing orange torchlight creating demon-like shadows on stone walls, mood of conspiracy and moral anguish, medium-wide shot showing the circle of shadowy figures, style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. The conspiracy had grown like a cancer through Rome's political body. It began with Cassius, a lean and bitter man who had fought on Pompey's side and never forgiven Caesar for pardoning him. Cassius saw tyranny in every gesture Caesar made, monarchy in every honor the dictator accepted. But Cassius was too obvious in his hatred. For the conspiracy to succeed, it needed a name that carried moral weight, a man whose reputation for honor was unimpeachable. It needed Marcus Brutus, descendant of the Brutus who had expelled Rome's last king 500 years earlier. Cassius worked on Brutus for weeks, leaving anonymous letters in places where Brutus would find them, messages that read, "You are sleeping, Brutus," and "You are no true Brutus." The psychological warfare was exquisite and devastating. Image prompt Hanfurf. 5. Marcus Brutus alone in his study at night, holding a flickering oil lamp over anonymous letters scattered across his desk. His face a portrait of inner torment, soft golden lamplight contrasting with deep shadows, mood of psychological torture and impossible decision, extreme close-up on his anguished eyes reflecting the flame. Style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. Imagine the weight of that decision. Brutus loved Caesar, who had been his mother's lover for years and might even have been his father. Caesar had shown Brutus nothing but favor, had made him praetor, had promised him great things. Yet Brutus also loved the Republic, that half-mythical system of balanced power and aristocratic privilege that had built Rome's empire. In Brutus's mind, these two loves had become incompatible. Caesar, the man, had to die so that Rome, the Republic, could live. It was the cruelest mathematics of loyalty ever calculated. Image prompt. 6. A sweeping aerial view of Rome in 44 BCE, the Forum Romanum bustling with citizens, temples gleaming white, the Tiber River curving through the city, bright midday sun casting the city in golden glory, mood of civilizational grandeur and historical significance, bird's eye view showing the vast urban landscape style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. The conspiracy eventually grew to include more than 60 senators, though only about 15 would actually wield daggers. They called themselves the Liberatores. Each man had his own reasons. Some genuinely believed in the Republic. Others had been passed over for positions they thought they deserved. Some were former enemies whom Caesar had pardoned, an act of clemency that these proud men experienced as humiliation. They met in secret, binding themselves with whispered oaths. They debated whether to kill Mark Antony alongside Caesar and decided against it, a mistake that would haunt them. They chose their location carefully, Pompey's Theatre, where the Senate would meet while the Curia was being rebuilt. The symbolism was perfect and intentional. Caesar would die beneath the statue of the rival he had destroyed. Image prompt. 7. The Theatre of Pompey's Senate meeting chamber. Senators in white togas gathering in the enclosed portico, massive statue of Pompey Magnus looming in the background, morning light streaming through columns, mood of false normalcy masking deadly intent, Wide establishing shot showing the architectural grandeur and gathering crowd. Style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner. Epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. As Caesar walked to the Senate that morning, a Greek philosopher named Artemidorus tried to hand him a scroll that detailed the entire conspiracy, naming every plotter. You can see it happening in your mind. The desperate teacher pushing through the crowd, the scroll extended, Caesar's attention caught by some other petitioner. "Read this immediately, Caesar," Artemidorus shouted. "It concerns you directly." But Caesar was mobbed by people seeking his attention, and the scroll remained unread in his hand. History turned on that moment of distraction. Had Caesar paused for 30 seconds to read those words, the entire course of Western civilization might have changed. Image prompt. 8. The Greek philosopher Artemidorus, desperately trying to hand a scroll to Caesar in a crowded street, his face contorted with urgent fear, Caesar distracted by other petitioners. Harsh morning shadows creating fragmented light, mood of missed opportunity and tragic inevitability, medium shot capturing the crucial moment of near revelation. Style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. Caesar entered Pompey's theater, and the trap snapped shut. The conspirators had stationed gladiators outside, men loyal to them who would prevent anyone from interfering. Inside, the senators rose in respect as Caesar took his golden chair. Then a senator named Julius Caesar approached with a petition to recall his exiled brother. This was the signal. Other conspirators crowded around, adding their voices to the petition, pressing closer, surrounding Caesar completely. You are watching from the edge of the room, unable to see what happens next because the press of white-togaed bodies blocks your view. You only hear Caesar's voice, irritated, saying, "Why? This is violence." Image prompt 9. The conspirators pressing close around Caesar's golden chair. White togas creating a suffocating circle. Tension visible in every posture. Filtered sunlight through columns creating stark contrasts. Mood of violence about to explode. Medium-wide shot showing the compressed space and trapped dictator style. Dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. Cimber yanked down Caesar's toga, exposing his neck and shoulder. This was the second signal. Casca struck first, stabbing at Caesar's neck, but his hand trembled and the blow glanced off, merely wounding. Caesar, 65 years old, but still the warrior who had conquered Gaul, spun and drove his iron stylus through Casca's arm. For a moment, it seemed possible that Caesar might fight his way free. Then the other daggers came out, 23 blades held by 60 hands that had sworn oaths of friendship. Cassius stabbed him in the face. Others struck his back, his chest, his thighs. The great general fought back, twisting and turning, but there were too many attackers in too small a space. Image prompt 10. The moment of first blood, Casca's trembling hand holding a dagger at Caesar's exposed neck, Caesar's face turning in shock and rage, harsh, direct sunlight creating a freeze-frame quality, mood of violence unleashed in intimate betrayal, extreme close-up on the point of contact between blade and flesh style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. Then Caesar saw Marcus Brutus moving toward him with a blade. Ancient sources disagree about what happened next. Some say Caesar spoke in Greek, kai su teknon, meaning You too, child? Others insist he said nothing, merely pulled his toga over his head so he would not have to see Brutus deliver the final blow. What we know for certain is that Caesar stopped fighting at that moment. He had faced down Germanic war chiefs, Celtic warriors, Egyptian armies, and Roman legions. He had swum for his life in Alexandria harbor. He had endured seizures and campaigned in snow and desert heat. But seeing Brutus among his killers broke something fundamental in him. He gave up. He arranged his toga with his last strength so that it would cover his body when he fell, maintaining dignity even in death. Image prompt. 11. Caesar's face at the moment of recognizing Brutus among his attackers, absolute betrayal and heartbreak visible in his expression, Brutus approaching with dagger raised, stormlight breaking through columns as if the heavens themselves react, mood of ultimate treachery and tragic destiny, extreme close-up on Caesar's devastated eyes, style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. He collapsed at the base of Pompey's statue, his blood pooling on the marble, staining the white stone red. The supreme irony was not lost on observers. Caesar died at the feet of the rival he had destroyed, as if Pompey was finally taking his revenge from beyond the grave. The attack had lasted perhaps 2 minutes. In that span, the Roman Republic's greatest general, the conqueror of Gaul, the man who had redrawn the map of the known world, bled out from 23 stab wounds. The conspirators stood around his body, daggers dripping, white togas splattered with red. In the sudden silence, they may have expected to hear cheering, to see Romans rush forward and thank them for saving the Republic. Instead, they heard screaming. Image prompt. 12. Caesar's body crumpled at the base of Pompey's massive marble statue, blood streaming down the white marble steps, conspirators standing frozen around the corpse with bloody daggers, harsh morning light creating long shadows, mood of shock and horrified realization, wide shots showing the full scene of assassination. Style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. The other senators fled in panic. Some jumped from windows. Others trampled each other in the doorways. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant and co-consul, was blocked outside by those gladiators and could only listen to the chaos within. The conspirators tried to rush into the Forum to announce their deed, but the streets emptied before them. Romans, seeing blood-stained senators waving daggers and shouting about liberty, assumed the city was under attack and barricaded themselves in their homes. The liberators had imagined this moment so many times, had convinced themselves that Rome would celebrate them as heroes. Instead, the city recoiled in horror and fear. Image prompt 13. Panicked senators fleeing through columns and corridors, robes flying, faces contorted in terror, some leaping from windows, chaotic afternoon light streaming through dust clouds, mood of absolute panic and civilization collapsing, wide dynamic shot capturing the explosive dispersal. Style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. Imagine walking through Rome that afternoon. The city of 1 million people has gone silent. Shops are shuttered. The Forum is empty except for Caesar's body, which lies abandoned where it fell until 3 slaves finally come to retrieve it. They load their master's corpse onto a litter, but there are only 3 of them where 6 are needed, so Caesar's arm dangles out, dragging along the street, leaving a trail of blood from Pompey's theater to his home in the Forum. You follow that crimson trail and think about how a man who commanded 50,000 legionaries ended his life being dragged home by 3 frightened slaves. Write image prompt. 14. 3 elderly slaves carrying Caesar's body on an improvised litter through empty streets, his arm hanging down and dragging on the cobblestones, leaving a blood trail, late afternoon golden light creating long shadows, mood of pathos and fallen majesty, tracking shot at low angle following the blood trail. Style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. The conspirators had planned the assassination brilliantly, but had given no thought to what came after. They held the Capitol for one day, barricaded behind gladiators, shouting proclamations that no one came to hear. Brutus gave speeches about liberty to empty streets. Cassius began to realize that they had miscalculated catastrophically. They had killed a tyrant, yes, but they had also murdered the most popular man in Rome, the general who had given land to thousands of veterans, who had put on magnificent games, who had won glory for Rome and Gaul. The people did not see liberators. They saw assassins who had butchered their champion in a cowardly group attack. Image prompt. 15. Brutus, standing on the Capitol steps, delivering an impassioned speech to an empty forum, his arms raised dramatically, only pigeons and stray dogs as his audience, harsh midday sun creating stark shadows, mood of delusion and tragedy, wide shot emphasizing the void between orator and missing crowd. Style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. Mark Antony emerged as the key player in the hours after the assassination. He was Caesar's lieutenant, a skilled general but also a political survivor. The conspirators had debated killing him alongside Caesar and had decided he was not dangerous enough to bother with. This was perhaps their greatest mistake. Antony negotiated with the assassins, seemingly accepting the new reality. He even had dinner with Cassius, but Antony was playing a deeper game. He waited for his moment, and it came at Caesar's funeral. Image prompt 16. Mark Antony in his military regalia, meeting with the conspirators in a torchlit room, his face a mask of false cooperation while his eyes burn with suppressed rage and cunning calculation, flickering orange torchlight creating duplicitous shadows, mood of dangerous political theater and hidden vengeance, medium shot capturing his deceptive body language, style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. You are standing in the Forum Romanum 3 days after the assassination. A massive crowd has gathered, the first time Romans have come out in numbers since the murder. Caesar's body lies on a pyre in the center of the Forum, and Antony stands above it, ready to deliver the funeral oration. The conspirators watch nervously from the edges of the crowd. Antony has promised to say nothing inflammatory. He begins simply reading Caesar's will, which leaves his gardens to the public and gives 300 sesterces to every Roman citizen. The crowd murmurs. Caesar, even in death, was generous. Then Antony holds up Caesar's toga, the blood-stained garment full of dagger holes, and the mood shifts. Image prompt. 17. Mark Antony on the rostra in the Forum holding up Caesar's blood-soaked and torn toga before a massive crowd, the garment catching afternoon light showing every tear and stain, mood of righteous fury being kindled, wide shot showing the vast crowd and Antony's commanding presence, style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. Antony does not directly attack the conspirators. He does not need to. He simply points to each hole in the fabric and speaks of Caesar's achievements. This wound here, dealt while Caesar was defending Rome from Germanic invasion. This cut here, inflicted as Caesar brought grain to feed Rome during famine. 23 wounds for a man who had conquered more territory than any Roman in history. The crowd's anger builds like a storm. Antony is a conductor, and Rome's fury is his orchestra. When he brings out a wax effigy of Caesar showing all the wounds, the crowd breaks. They riot. They seize furniture from nearby buildings and add it to Caesar's pyre, creating an inferno. Then they hunt for the assassins. Image prompt. 18. The forum erupting into chaos, Caesar's funeral pyre blazing enormous in the center, rioters smashing buildings and hunting through streets with torches, smoke and fire creating hellish orange light, mood of unleashed mob violence and revenge, bird's eye view showing the scale of the riot, style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. Brutus and Cassius flee Rome that night, never to return. The man they encounter on the road is a poet, also named Cinna, confused with Cinna, the conspirator. The mob tears him apart despite his screams that he is the wrong man. "I am Cinna the poet," he cries. "Tear him for his bad verses," someone shouts back. And they kill him anyway. This is what the liberators have unleashed. Not grateful restoration of republican virtue, but chaos, violence, and the death of reason itself. Image prompt 19. The innocent poet Cinna, surrounded by torches and angry faces in a dark, narrow street, his face contorted in terror as he tries to explain the mistake. Harsh torchlight creating monster-like shadows, mood of mob injustice and civilization's breakdown, tight medium shot capturing the claustrophobia of the moment, style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. Octavian, Caesar's 18-year-old grandnephew and adopted heir, returns from across the Adriatic when he hears of the assassination. Few take him seriously. He is young, slight, often sick, and has no military experience. Mark Antony dismisses him as a boy who owes everything to a name. But this boy has inherited Caesar's fortune, Caesar's veterans' loyalty, and something more dangerous, Caesar's genius for understanding power. Within 3 years, Octavian will defeat Antony. Within 13 years, he will become Augustus, the first emperor. The republic that Brutus killed Caesar to save will die anyway, strangled by Caesar's heir. Image prompt. 20. Young Octavian receiving news of Caesar's assassination in a military camp, his boyish face showing cold calculation beyond his years as he reads the letter, dawn light breaking over his shoulder, mood of destiny awakening and calculated determination, close-up emphasizing his youth and dangerous intelligence, style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. The liberators raise armies in the east. 2 years after the assassination, they meet Antony and Octavian at Philippi in Macedonia. You stand on the battlefield and watch 2 visions of Rome's future clash. Brutus commands the right wing, Cassius the left. They fight well, these defenders of the old republic, but they are fighting history itself. When the battle turns against them, they choose the Roman way out. Cassius falls on his sword, followed by Brutus. Before he dies, Brutus supposedly quotes Greek tragedy, O wretched virtue, you were but a name, and yet I worshipped you as real indeed, but now it seems you were but fortune's slave. Image prompt 21. The battlefield of Philippi shrouded in smoke and dust, thousands of legionaries clashing in the distance, storm clouds gathering overhead creating dramatic light, mood of historical forces colliding, extreme wide shots showing the epic scale of the battle, style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. The severed heads of Brutus and Cassius are sent to Rome, where Octavian has them placed at the base of Pompey's statue where Caesar died. The symmetry is perfect and terrible. Every conspirator will die violently within 3 years. Some fall on their swords. Others are hunted down and executed. A few die in battle. Not one lives to see his vision of restored republic realized, because that republic was already dead. It had been dying for decades, poisoned by its own success, unable to govern an empire with institutions designed for a city-state. Image prompt. 2 pike-mounted severed heads positioned at the base of Pompey's statue, blood still fresh, flowers wilting nearby from Caesar's memorial, gray, overcast light creating somber mood, composition emphasizing the cyclical nature of revenge, medium shots showing the grotesque trophy, style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. What did Caesar want? This question haunts history. He refused the crown that Antony offered him at the Lupercalia festival weeks before his death. But was that genuine refusal or political theater? Did he want to be king, or did he simply want to solve Rome's governance crisis in the only way that seemed practical? Rome had grown too large, too complex for the old system. The provinces needed strong central authority. The legions needed a permanent commander-in-chief. The poor needed someone to champion them against aristocratic indifference. Caesar provided all this, but doing so required breaking sacred traditions and concentrating power in ways that made him indistinguishable from a monarch. Image prompt 23, Caesar refusing the crown from Mark Antony at the Lupercalia festival, massive crowd watching in tense silence, bright midday sun creating theatrical lighting, mood of historical ambiguity and political performance, wide shot capturing the public spectacle. Style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. The conspirators convinced themselves that killing Caesar would restore the Republic, but they were nostalgic dreamers mistaking form for substance. Rome was an empire. It controlled the Mediterranean world. It needed imperial administration. The Republic's institutions were not designed for such scale. Caesar recognized this. The conspirators did not or could not, so they killed the symptom and called it a cure, never understanding that the disease was Rome's own success. Image prompt 24. A ghostly, transparent vision of Republican Rome overlaid with the vast, sprawling empire shown on a map, territories spreading across the Mediterranean, impossible governing distances illustrated, golden afternoon light creating nostalgic glow contrasted with imperial reality, conceptual bird's eye view showing the mismatch between institution and empire, style. Dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. Imagine the tragic irony from Caesar's perspective. He had pardoned most of the men who killed him. After defeating them in civil war, he showed unprecedented mercy, a policy he called clementia. Brutus, Cassius, Decimus, and dozens of others owed their lives to Caesar's forgiveness. They held positions of power because Caesar appointed them. His clemency was meant to heal Rome's wounds, to prove that the civil wars could end in reconciliation rather than proscription and murder. Instead, his mercy enabled his assassination. The men he forgave interpreted his clemency as weakness or mockery. They killed him for sparing them. Image prompt 25. Caesar magnanimously pardoning a kneeling defeated enemy after battle, placing his hand on the man's shoulder in forgiveness, but the enemy's hidden face shows resentment and humiliation rather than gratitude. Golden hour light creating seemingly warm mood belying psychological tension. Medium shot capturing the loaded gesture. Style. Dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner. Epic cinematic scale. Photorealistic detail. Dark atmospheric mood. 16.9 widescreen. Shakespeare would immortalize the assassination 4 centuries later, creating the version most people know. Et tu, Brute, becomes perhaps the most famous line in theater, the ultimate expression of betrayal. But Shakespeare's play, brilliant as it is, misses something essential. The historical Brutus was not a simple, honorable man, torn between friendship and duty. He was a complex figure who loaned money at illegal interest rates, who had grown rich from political connections, who killed his benefactor partly from principle, but also from aristocratic prejudice against Caesar's populism. History is not a morality play. The liberators were not pure heroes, nor was Caesar a simple tyrant. They were men trapped in an impossible historical moment, all making terrible choices. Image prompt 26. A ghostly semi-transparent theatrical stage overlaid on the historical Roman scene, showing how Shakespeare's version both illuminates and obscures the truth. Actors in Elizabethan ruffs, visible through Roman togas, twilight ambiguous lighting, mood of layered historical interpretation, composite shot showing multiple realities, style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen, walk through the Forum Romanum today, more than 2,000 years later. The stones where Caesar bled are still there, incorporated into later structures, walked over by millions of tourists who do not know what happened on that spot. The temple of Caesar that Augustus built to deify his adopted father stands in ruins. The Theatre of Pompey, where the assassination occurred, is buried under medieval Roman buildings. But the story lives. It has been told and retold in every generation since, because it speaks to something fundamental about power, ambition, loyalty, and the price of political violence. Image prompt 27, modern-day tourists walking unknowingly over the ancient stones of the Forum, where Caesar was carried bleeding, ghostly transparent overlay of ancient Rome visible through the ruins, soft afternoon sunlight on weathered marble, mood of temporal layering and historical continuity, wide shot contrasting ancient grandeur with modern ruin, style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. The assassination failed in every particular. The Republic was not saved. Democracy was not restored. The civil wars did not end but intensified. Antony and Octavian created proscription lists, murdering thousands of senators and equestrians, seizing their property. The philosophical senator Cicero, who had not been part of the conspiracy but had celebrated it, was hunted down and beheaded. Antony had Cicero's head and hands nailed to the rostra in the Forum, where he had given so many speeches. Antony's wife Fulvia reportedly pulled out Cicero's tongue and stabbed it with her hairpins. This was the liberty that killing Caesar had purchased, not republican virtue, but score-settling and massacre. Image prompt 28. Cicero's severed head and hands nailed to the rostra in the Forum, citizens passing by in horror, cold, gray winter light creating mood of accomplished revenge, close-up shot showing the grotesque display and reactions, style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen, the ultimate victor, Octavian, learned from Caesar's mistake. He did not refuse the crown, he made it unnecessary. He did not become dictator, he accepted a constellation of powers that amounted to the same thing but looked different. He changed his name to Augustus and ruled for 41 years, transforming Rome into an empire in fact as well as name. He was careful never to appear as a king, always maintaining the fiction of the republic, even as he built monarchy. The lesson of his adoptive father's assassination was clear. Appearances matter more than reality. Caesar had reached for power too openly. Augustus achieved the same power by pretending not to want it. Image prompter. Augustus Caesar in later life, aged and dignified, wearing simple toga but radiating absolute authority, surrounded by symbols of power that appear to be honors rather than seized authority. Soft morning light creating benevolent appearance, medium shot showing his masterful political camouflage. Style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting, reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. Some historians argue that the assassination of Caesar was necessary, that his continued rule would have been worse for Rome than the civil wars that followed. Others contend that Caesar was solving Rome's governance crisis, and that killing him doomed the Republic more surely than his ambition ever could. Both views contain truth. Caesar had become too powerful for Republican institutions, but the men who killed him offered no viable alternative except nostalgia for a system that no longer functioned. They were conservatives in the deepest sense, trying to preserve a past that could not be retrieved. Image prompt 30. A conceptual image of Rome as a body with two physicians, one offering the medicine of monarchical authority, the other the medicine of republican tradition, but the patient is already dying from imperial success, symbolic torchlight creating allegorical shadows, mood of philosophical tragedy and historical inevitability, stylized medium-wide shot style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. You stand at the moment of the first wound, frozen in time. Casca's trembling blade has just touched Caesar's neck. Everything that follows, the 22 more wounds, the fall at Pompey's feet, the civil wars, the proscriptions, the transformation into empire, all of it cascades from this instant. Can you imagine a single decision that would change everything if Caesar had read Artemidorus' scroll, if he had listened to Calpurnia, if Brutus had refused to join, if the conspirators had included Mark Antony in their plot? History turns on such moments, and yet looking back, it all seems inevitable, as if these people were not making choices, but following a script written by forces larger than any individual will. Image prompt 31. A conceptual time-frozen moment showing multiple possible futures radiating from the instant of Casca's first blow, ghost images of alternative histories, strange suspended light as if time itself has stopped, mood of infinite possibility collapsing into singular reality, complex layered composition style, dramatic chiaroscuro oil painting reminiscent of Rembrandt and Turner, epic cinematic scale, Photorealistic detail, dark atmospheric mood, 16.9 widescreen. The name Caesars became a title. Kaiser in German, Tsar in Russian. For 2,000 years, European rulers would claim inheritance from the man murdered on the Ides of March. The dictator's name became synonymous with imperial authority, precisely what Brutus killed him to prevent. This is perhaps the assassination's cruelest irony. It did not end Caesar's power, but immortalized it, transforming a mortal politician into an eternal symbol. By making him a martyr, the conspirators gave Caesar a kind of victory they could never have imagined. Image, prompt 32. Aus Ides.